Hi, I'm Justin Barrett, president of Blueprint 1543. I am a psychological scientist and former university professor, and today I want to share with you a measurement technique, a way to sort of check in on your life, and it's called Strivings Matrix. It's early in the year. It's the time of year we start doing lots of introspection on how are we doing with life? Are we living into the things that are important to us? Do our actions and our motivations align? Are we generally healthy in our outlook? And those types of activities are often benefited by some clear-eyed measurement. And so I want to give you a tool for doing some of that clear-eyed measurement. A Strivings Matrix was developed by Robert Emmons, now former professor of psychology at University of California, Davis. My friend Bob Emmons, he's most well known for his work on gratitude. He's kind of like, the big dog in gratitude research. But before that, he did work in just sort of general well-being, psychology of religion and spirituality, and general personality psychology. One of the sort of innovations that he came up with in the personality psychology area was discovering that there's kind of a level of personality that's between these enduring traits and these sort of socially encouraged motivations, somewhere in between there, a level that he calls strivings. These are sort of your day-to-day goals that typically motivate your action throughout a typical day. Like if you're a student, then it might be something like, I try to be a good student, I try to get good grades, or I try to be popular with my peers, or whatever it is. I try to please my parents. Or if you're an old married guy like me, it's I try to be a good husband. Or I try to live out a good Christian life, or whatever it is. You have these sort of strivings that you can characterize as the things you typically try to do on a day-to-day basis. And what's interesting about these strivings is they can tell you a lot about what your values, your priorities are, what's meaningful to you, but also how they conflict with each other. And that's really where I want to focus today. You can find more on this work in, for instance, where I learned about it was in Bob Emmons' book, The Psychology of Ultimate Concerns, a really kind of cool but slightly nerdy book where he digs into some of this stuff. But you can also find it in the journal articles and primary literature. To inspect your strivings, as they're called, take a little bit of time, get out a notepad or something, a pen, sit down, give yourself at least 15 minutes to get started, and just try to complete the sentence. On a typical day, I try to ... Okay, I try to, and it can be, be a good citizen, be a loving person, live up to my standards, please my spouse, be a good parent, whatever it is. Okay, come up with the ones that characterize you. How do you typically try to live on a day-to-day basis? Most people can come up with 10 in about 10, 15 minutes. If you really push yourself, you might get up to 15, but you don't have to. Just come up with about 10 of these that characterize who you see yourself and try to be honest with yourself. I typically try to, and then complete the sentence. So write these 10 down. After you've compiled your list of strivings, then you can do a couple of different exercises that are really kind of helpful. At least when I go through these exercises myself, I find that they're revealing. They help me see myself in a new way. And it might be helpful to create a grid on a piece of paper, or it's easier, use Excel or Numbers or one of these spreadsheet programs that you have on a computer. Because then your vertical column, you can type in each of those 10 or 15 strivings, however many you came up with, and also label each column with the same strivings, okay? So your strivings are running across the vertical and the horizontal, all right? So that then in each cell where they meet, you can go, okay, I typically try to be a good husband. I typically try to be a good husband. Well, I don't have to do anything with that. It's the same one, so I'm going to ignore that one. But I can look at, I typically try to be a good husband. I typically try to be a good parent. And then I can rate them for how much these strivings either help or hurt each other in their satisfaction. Do they conflict or do they support? And a common way to score these is from -2, ooh, they're in conflict, to +2. Hey, they really help each other. A 0 is kind of meh. They kind of leave each other alone. They don't help or hurt each other very much. All right? So you're trying to measure conflict. So Does being a good spouse conflict or support me being a good parent? Well, if I'm investing in my wife, maybe I'm not investing as much in my kids, so maybe that's a little bit of conflict. But if I'm not a good parent, it really ticks off my wife, so that's a lot of conflict. So actually, maybe I'll give them a +1, a score of +1. They support, they go together. Okay, what about being the awesomest professional that I can be? How does that relate then to being a good parent? Oh, well, actually, there's a lot of conflict there, but it does help me provide for my family. I'll make that a -1. Okay, and you can see how you might go through these and look for how much they conflict. -2, a lot of conflict. +2, lots of support. -1, a little bit of conflict. +1, a little bit of support. 0, meh, somewhere in between, right? So you rate each of your 10 or 12 or 15 strivings against each other. That's going to give you a Strivings Matrix and lots of numbers, lots of little bitty numbers. Next step is to then come up with a total score of your entire matrix. Add up all of those little numbers, all of those -2s, -1s, 0s, +1s, and +2s. Add them all up. That gives you a number, an overall number representing the amount of conflict in your Strivings Matrix. Okay, so if you have a score of 0, on balance, your strivings don't conflict with each other, but they don't help each other either. If you have a positive score, on balance, your strivings actually help each other. If you've got a negative score, then on balance, your strivings tend to work against each other. So now you've got some sense of, is my strivings matrix positive or negative? Or is it neutral? Why is that good information to have? Well, back to Bob Emmons in his research, he's shown that strivings matrices that tend to have lots of conflict in them also predict negative psychological and physical health. People just have less subjective well-being. That is, they're not as happy. They report being less satisfied with their lives. And that leads to stressors. They have more anxiety, they have more negative feelings, and they often just don't do as well physically. So college students have more absenteeism and more visits to the health center. That kind of thing if there's too much conflict in your strivings matrix. So it's not a bad check-in on yourself to see, do my strivings harmonize? Do they support each other? Or is there some negative? And if there is negative in there, you might inspect, well, which of those strivings maybe are causing the most conflict with the other things that motivate you throughout your life? You might discover through this exercise, for instance, that you've got a particular day-to-day goal that actually messes up all of your other goals. Well, maybe you should get rid of that one. Or is there a way to frame it, change it, pursue it in a different way so that it doesn't produce so much conflict? Because, like I said, there's reason to believe conflict of our strivings then is just not healthy for us psychologically or physically. Another little interesting feature of Emmons' research is that he found that strivings that have spiritual content, or you might label as religious, strivings like I try to please God, or I try to imitate Jesus, I try to serve my church, community, or whatever it is. If it has that spiritual religious content, typically a strivings matrix that has a lot of spirituality in it tends to have less conflict in it. And as a result, then, there's less of that negative well-being going on. So interestingly, it seems that having spiritual strivings kind of straightens out what could be conflicts in a striving matrix. And it doesn't take too much reflection to realize why that would be. A lot of our religious traditions, a lot of our spirituality is worked out in our religious traditions, and our religious traditions often have been carefully thought out and sort of smoothed out for the conflict such that they give you a broader meaning-making system that sort of straightens out the spaghetti of all of the different objectives of our lives. They can be harmonized in many ways. And the research seems to back this up. It's an interesting exercise to try out. List those strivings. That's a good exercise all by itself, so you can identify, well, what is really motivating me on a day-to-day basis and what isn't. Then you can rate those strivings for how much they conflict with each other. Another thing you can do is rate them for how meaningful they are. Because if we have lots of meaning in our strivings matrix, that also tends to associate with well-being and good stuff. And it might help you identify if you've got a striving, for instance, that's producing a lot of conflict, but it's not very meaningful to you. Get rid of it, get a new one. And it's really nice at the beginning of a year to sort of do this kind of inspection. to measure our own lives a little bit so that we can put ourselves on a positive, more fruitful path for the new year. So I hope inspecting your strivings and doing a strivings matrix is a tool that you can use that's going to improve your well-being this year. I hope you find this useful. As always, subscribe, like, share these videos, but also send us comments about topics that you'd like me to discuss. I'm Justin Barrett from Blueprint 1543. Have a great 2024.